The LUMIX S1 II is a camera that's had a lot of things leveled at it this year. It's an FX3 killer, it's this year's best mirrorless camera, it's this year's most overhyped mirrorless camera, it overheats, it's too sharp. So in this video, after some long-term use, I'm going to try and unpick this confusing jumble of accolades. Is it a bit of a generalist, a jack of all trades but master of none, or can it really deliver on all of the things that it promises? And ultimately help you figure out whether this is a camera that you should buy, upgrade to, or even consider switching systems to. Let's get into it. I've been using the LUMIX S1 II since launch, about 6 months, just a little bit more, and it's come out on nearly every single professional shoot of mine this year. So I've predominantly been using it as a B cam next to my Pixel 6K or Komodo. So 2 camera interview setups, one on a wide, one on a close. And I think the 2 cameras just complement each other really well. And I think the LUMIX S1 II sort of fills in the gaps of the things and features that the Pixel definitely lacks. So obviously that's stuff like autofocus, IBIS, higher frame rates. If we had to stick the camera on a gimbal and we needed autofocus, S1 II was great for that. But even just doing like walking follow shots quickly without a gimbal, the IBIS in this camera is so good, especially with the cropless IBIS, that you could get near gimbal-like shots and sequences without having to burn time putting it and balancing it on a gimbal. Having access to the high frame rate shooting on this camera is also fantastic. And again, complementing the Pixel. The Pixel is a camera that barely hits 50 frames a second in the 6K. So having a camera that can go up to 100, 120 frames a second in 4K with minimum crop and still make use of decent autofocus has been absolutely fantastic. And it's just added another layer of production quality to my projects. And again, it's a super small body. The Pixel is quite a large, clunky camera. Often if we're rushing around and we don't have enough time, it's the LUMIX S1 II that gets picked up to quickly grab some crucial B-roll where we wouldn't have had time to move around with the Pixel. In terms of mixing the footage in post, I feel like the 2 cameras pair really nicely. And in fact, as I mentioned in the previous Pixel video, I actually, for this project, pushed the Pixel footage into Vlog to make the grading workflow much more streamlined and to, have some parity between the workflow between the 2 cameras. And it was fantastic and really quick and easy to do. I think the only criticism and the only issue where I sort of felt like the LUMIX camera falls down is just its sharpness. It has that hybrid mirrorless look. So I do find myself in post trying to mitigate that as much as possible, adding a little bit of blur, pulling back the mid detail, but I'm fairly happy with being able to get the image where I want and being able to mitigate some of that in post. Overall, the image quality on the S1 II is a massive step up from the previous line. Like, to me, there is a significant difference with how these cameras handle stuff like colors, noise, and underexposure and stuff like that. So these are cameras, that will really allow you to shoot in difficult and demanding situations, stuff where you're working on the fly and might not always be able to have the perfect lighting or dial in the perfect exposure or white balance. This has played out on my professional shoots throughout the year. I rarely have to contend with blown out highlights, and when I underexpose stuff, I've never had any issues fixing the footage in post. Previous cameras like the LUMIX S5 IIX, they also had great dynamic range, but they just didn't perform as well when it came to like color fidelity when you underexposed those cameras. Like, they just had a tendency to be a little bit muddy, a little bit mushy and green and beige in the shadows. And if you were underexposing stuff, you had to work a little bit harder to pull it back in post, and you had to obviously mitigate those color shifts. Vlog is one of my favorite log profiles to work in. I mean, if you nail it in camera, you can get great results with this camera with just a basic Rec 709 color space transform or LUT. Of course, if you want to take things further, it's very easy to get stunning results, and you shouldn't have to waste too much time fixing skin tones or other elements that you might have to with other camera brands. Pretty much everything you're seeing in this video has been graded with my new LUT and Powergrade for Panasonic Lumix cameras, and it's called Hackney, and it's designed specifically for Vlog. It comes as either a standalone LUT pack or as a Powergrade, which also comes with the LUT pack too. It's designed to give you a fairly decent neutral starting point and a nice sort of Rec 7 and 9 image, and then you can combine elements of the Powergrade or other elements of the LUT pack to build and customize your own looks tailored to your own needs. So even with the LUT pack, I've designed this to give you as much flexibility and customization as possible. So it includes what I call my stackable LUTs. These are LUTs that you can stack either before or after the main Rec 7 and 9 LUT to sort of build and customize your own looks and to kind of emulate what you get with a Resolve Powergrade. The Powergrade obviously offers the most flexibility and customization because within that I can also include effects. And there are some nodes in the Powergrade that are specifically designed to combat some of that digital harshness or sharpness that some of these Lumix cameras have. So we've got like a softening node and a bloom node. There's obviously grain, and there's loads of other stuff like color density, teal boost, a green saturator. I've also included sort of 5 specific looks which I've labeled as film tones. So I'm soft launching it now with this video. It's going to be available at a very discounted price, probably the cheapest it will ever be. And then next year, I'm going to put a proper video out about the Powergrade, talk through it, give a little tutorial. And at that point, I'll be setting it at the full retail price. If you've been watching my channel over the years and enjoy my Lumix content, this is just a great way to support the channel and my time that goes into making these videos. The dynamic range on this new generation of cameras is fantastic, and if you want to see sort of in-depth testing and color charts, watch my original LUMIX S1 II video where I put it through its paces and compare it to previous cameras. But it's also the tools that these cameras give you. Like, they introduced false color with this new generation of cameras. I just map it to the front button of the camera, and it's just become such an integral part of my workflow of using this camera. I've recently just picked up the Nikon ZR. It doesn't have false color, and it's really frustrating to have to go back to a camera without it. The S1 Mark II also has dynamic range boost mode. Again, if you want to know more about this, go back and watch my other video, but in essence, I believe it combines the sort of low gain and high gain circuits of the camera into one, and it gives you basically extended dynamic range, especially in your highlights, but it comes at the cost of rolling shutter. So we can see in these color charts here, if we expose the camera with it off at ISO 640 or ISO 5000, that it just clips much sooner than it does with the dynamic range expansion on. Roughly from my test, I think you get between 1 and 2 extra stops in your highlights. Honestly, I never use this mode professionally. I find the dynamic range from these cameras to be excellent for most shooting scenarios. But I guess it would be really useful to use if, say, you had the camera on a tripod, you were shooting an interview with a window in the background, and you just needed that extra bump in highlight latitude to keep those windows in check. And obviously, if it's on sticks, then you're just not going to notice the hit to rolling shutter. I've already made a video about B-roll on this camera. I recommend watching that if you want a more in-depth look at what I think about this and how I work with it and what it offers. But in short, this is Lumix's best B-roll offering to date in this camera. So obviously it's not internal. I wish it was, that'd be great. But if you connect a Blackmagic Video Assist, you get access to RAW recording functionality over HDMI. This is the first camera that I would say gives you like a project-ready B-roll offering. What I mean by that is that you finally get a full range of shooting resolutions and frame rates that you would typically want in any average project. So, you know, not just capping out at 30p at full resolution, but also offering stuff like, you know, 50, 60 frames a second in that same resolution. And it doesn't stop there. So if you're willing to crop in a little bit, I think it's like an APS-C crop, and go to Cinema 4K, then you also get access up to 120 frames a second in RAW, which is fantastic. You know, the B-roll footage looks stunning. It's got this like incredible level of detail and clarity to it. Again, you know, the same criticisms that I have with the internal footage, it is still incredibly sharp. The camera doesn't have an optical low pass filter. But again, as I mentioned in my B-roll video, there is a workflow that I can use to help soften things up pretty quickly. And, you know, I'm pretty happy where I can get the image. More recently, Blackmagic also dropped the bombshell that it was finally going to accept ProRes RAW in DaVinci Resolve. And this was kind of like getting an extra firmware update and set of features for your camera. So previously, it was kind of like the weird situation having this like really chunky ProRes RAW internal codec on these cameras, but then not really being able to make use of it in the sort of primary color grading software that is Resolve. Just like external B-RAW, the internal ProRes RAW is stunning, and it's a great way to maximize the information that you're capturing from this camera and skipping some of that internal processing. People will often ask, which is better, internal ProRes RAW or external B-RAW? Both have fantastic image quality and dynamic range, but I think it will largely come down to what you need and what you want. Obviously, with the internal ProRes, you don't get the same option of resolutions and frame rate. Full sensor recording caps out at 30 frames a second, and if you want to go up to 50 or 60 frames a second, you will have to contend with an APS-C crop. But you also don't have to bolt on an external monitor and cart that around with you. Obviously, the benefit of B-RAW is that you get more recording options, open gate, 50 frames a second, full frame, and being able to capture up to 120 frames a second in RAW. B-RAW also just gives you far more compression options, and ProRes RAW is a pretty chunky codec to work in, so if you want to keep your file sizes smaller, B-RAW might be the way to go. But if you want to keep things simple and you're traveling, ProRes RAW is a fantastic codec to have internally on this tiny camera. If you want to shoot anamorphic, especially on a small form factor, then out of all of the camera brands out there, you're probably going to want to be shooting on LUMIX. So LUMIX have had fantastic anamorphic features throughout their lineup of cameras for years, and most modern brands are just about catching up. If you do find these modern hybrid cameras too sharp, that shooting anamorphic is a great way to overcome that. Even shooting on the sort of sharper, modern, clinical anamorphic lenses like those from Sirui still have a really nice, pleasing, softening effect on the image that you can get out of this camera. So I shot on the Iron style anamorphics a few months back, and even though I wasn't the biggest fan of those lenses in terms of, the design, them being sharper anamorphics, I actually really love what they did to the image of the camera. As you'd expect, shooting anamorphic on this camera is made very easy by stuff like internal monitor D-squeeze, anamorphic IBIS, and of course the open gate functionality. And the sort of cherry on top with this new camera is that you now, for the first time in a hybrid mirrorless camera, get up to 60 frames a second in 5.1K open gate. So again, they're offering this kind of like project ready, open gate anamorphic format internally in the camera. If you're doing a project where you're shooting interviews and want to do B-roll in slower motion, you've got that option now. I think the autofocus wars are maybe over now, or if not, we're close to some sort of peace treaty between brands. I think plenty of creators have now demonstrated that LUMIX's autofocus system is on par, if not equivalent, to most of the other brands like Sony and people like that. Gary Schaefer's done a lot of great testing. Check out some of his videos where he's done side-by-side tests. I think most long-term viewers know that I'm not a huge autofocus person, but when I have used it on smaller shoots with native lenses, it's worked flawlessly. Even in the 100 frames a second mode, where you lose stuff like subject detection and tracking, I've always found the autofocus to just get it right all the time. There's no hunting or pulsing, even in demanding low light situations. LUMIX have always been at the forefront of IBIS, and with the S1R Mark II and the S1 Mark II and S1 Mark II-E, they introduced this great new feature, cropless IBIS. Unfortunately, it only works on the native LUMIX lenses, but generally on previous versions of the camera, if you shot on a lens, that was below 35mm, you got the sort of standard IBIS jello edge warping. They've solved that now with this cropless IBIS system, so you can shoot on what is my favorite lens, the 18mm, shoot handheld, and it is rock solid. It is like, this is next gen. It's like going from a PlayStation 1 to a PlayStation 2. You notice the difference, and it's like one of those magical features that literally changes the way that you shoot. I wish you know, maybe in the next gen of cameras, they can work out a way to extend this to non-native lenses, or even just to maybe like lenses in the L-mount alliance. That would be incredible. So when the LUMIX S1 Mark II was launched this year, they also announced this alongside it, which is the 24-60 zoom lens. And I was really excited about this because I'm not generally a huge fan of 24-70 and modern sort of still zoom lens, but for a while I've been wanting like a really compact shooting package for smaller solo jobs where I'm often traveling, something that I can pack down into a single backpack and being confident that I have everything that I need to get every job done. And then the next crucial piece of this puzzle was also the XLR top module, which I'm using now. And this setup has basically become my go-to both on professional shoots, but also in my second life as a content creator and YouTuber. I need something that's quick and easy to use when I'm filming myself, that doesn't slow me down. And since I've had this camera, pretty much everything on this YouTube channel has been shot with LUMIX S1 Mark II in terms of A-roll, using the top module, and either the 18mm LUMIX S Lens or this. So this is always used when I'm capturing like B-roll, behind the scenes, product videography, so anytime I'm getting shots of lenses and products and stuff like that, those top-down shots that I tend to feature in my videos. It's been such a versatile package, and if you were to buy this camera for the first time with one lens, and that's all your budget could reach to, I would recommend picking it up with this lens. It's been fantastic. Now, it's not perfect. This lens obviously is a modern stills lens. It's sharp, it's not the most interesting. There's loads of stuff you can do in post to kind of mitigate that. In terms of the XLR top module, again, it's a fantastic piece of kit, and it's been a game changer for my YouTube setup. So now I just plumb a shotgun microphone in, point it directly at me, and I don't have to worry about levels because it's recording in 32-bit. Previously, I think anyone who's filmed themselves will have gone through the pain of messing up audio because, you know, you can't really monitor your audio when you're recording yourself. But I do think LUMIX missed a trick when they designed this XLR top module, because I really wish that they'd sort of emulated what Sony have done with their FX line camera audio top handles. Because this top module is great when the camera's sitting on sticks and you're recording interviews, but the moment you want to take the camera off the tripod and shoot handheld, it causes a lot of problems. Normally I would want to have a cage and a top handle pretty much where that XLR module needs to go, and that's where I would also mount my external monitor as well, but now it's blocked by the top module. If LUMIX are watching, I really hope that they can do a Mark II of this and create it as an integrated top handle. They've put so much thought into the design of their camera, great IBIS, they're designed to be picked up and moved around, so I just don't know why they haven't provided this XLR top handle in that form factor like we've seen, you know, on a Sony FX line of cameras. It just seems like an oversight to me. It's not a perfect camera. For me, the image from this camera is still maybe like a little too sharp. It lacks just like a bit of the magic that I have in a camera like my Komodo and Pixis. But like, I've gone in this with my eyes open, right? This isn't a cinema camera. I'm not necessarily expecting it to have an optical low pass filter and to have that kind of like cinema camera like quality when I need that. I shoot on my cinema cameras. I think as like a pure production tool, this thing is fantastic. It fills in all of the gaps and things that my other cinema cameras don't have. So like autofocus, you know, high frame rate shooting, stabilized sensor, whilst also having like decent compressed codecs and also some raw functionality if I need it. I've stress tested this thing in terms of shooting docks on it, and when I paired it with cine lenses, I found that it did help mitigate some of the sharpness. Of course, you could just go and buy a cinema camera as well, but then you are going to be losing all of the functionality and quality of life stuff that sort of this camera wraps around the sensor and makes life easier, especially if you are a solo shooter or a content creator. I am not out there shooting content creation stuff or YouTube stuff on my Pixar 6K. I'm not shooting my talking heads on that. I'm shooting my talking heads on this camera. I hope whichever camera LUMIX launch next, if it is going to be a video-centric camera, that they just stick an optical low-pass filter in it and tweak some of their image processing in a way that just renders a slightly softer, more pleasing image relative to these more sort of like hybrid stills focused cameras. One other thing I guess I could nitpick was sensor readout speed. Although I've never genuinely found this to be a problem in this or even in the slower S1R Mark II, you know, some people generally do need a camera with lightning fast sensor readout speed, and it's an area where most LUMIX cameras have sort of fallen behind the industry average. I'd say on the S1 Mark II, I think it's around 14 milliseconds. It's perfectly respectable, but it's not going to win any awards or anything like that. And in my use case, shooting handheld, shooting docks and stuff like that, again, it's never been an issue. The other thing that isn't great is the external monitor lag. You can improve it by disabling audio over HDMI, but the monitor lag is still something that's a little bit of an issue, particularly if you're recording B-RAW in these cameras. If they are going to release another video-centric camera, it is an area that I think they are really going to have to tackle on that camera, because on a video-centric camera, it's probably going to be presumed that most of the users are going to be using external monitors, and I don't think you can really get away with significant monitor lag in that use case. Even though the autofocus performance in LUMIX cameras has seen huge advancements over the last few cameras, I still think they need to go that step further and make sure that they can maintain this autofocus functionality across all shooting modes. So what I'm talking about is if you're shooting in the higher frame rate modes, you lose tracking. Sometimes when you've got an external monitor attached, you'll lose tracking in some of the higher resolutions. And those sort of little quirks where you've got to do a bit of mental maths on the fly when you're working, just to keep on top of stuff like that and notice when you're losing that functionality and when you're getting it back. It's just something that can be a little bit distracting when you're in the heat of the moment. Finally, it's just the internal RAW offering. I want to see B-RAW inside a camera. I don't know if that's possible, but I would love to see B-RAW inside a LUMIX camera. ProRes RAW is great, as we've mentioned. It's just chunky, and it's not, I think, everyone's favorite and first choice when it comes to shooting in RAW. And also just not stripping back the available frame rates. So if you are going to give full sensor RAW recording functionality, make sure you go up to at least 60 frames a second, because then that's going to be usable in most projects. If you're shooting interviews, you know, at 25 frames and capturing B-roll in 50 frames a second, it just makes it more useful and more realistic for most professional shooters. So should you pick up the LUMIX S1 Mark II? Well, it's a camera that will meet most modern demands. You know, we as professionals now are sort of wearing multiple caps. You know, I run a production business, I'm a content creator and YouTuber, I shoot passion projects and short documentaries with friends. And this is a camera that I can confidently use to sort of do all of that type of work, and it does it all really well as well. If you have one of the previous generations of LUMIX cameras, so maybe the first gen S1H or S5, if you think the features in this camera offer you something more that you need, then definitely it's going to be worth looking to upgrade. If you don't need all of the fancy features like autofocus and all the new open gate stuff, then you may just be happy and better off and perfectly fine with the S1H and the S5. I still think those cameras are going to be a perfectly good shooting option as we move into 2026. If you're coming from something like the Mark II, so maybe the LUMIX S5 Mark II, it's maybe a slightly more subtle or harder decision. I would say if you're just using it for stuff like this, where it's just living on sticks, using autofocus and everything is, you know, perfectly lit and stuff, you're probably not going to see huge benefits or a huge step up. But as soon as you take the camera off sticks, you go walk around with it, you go handheld, you put it in more demanding situations, mixed lighting, low lighting, that's where the use case and the argument for upgrading to the S1 Mark II becomes a lot clearer. It just offers, you know, better IBIS, better autofocus, better codecs, and it's just going to give you a lot more mileage. If you currently shoot on another system like Sony or Canon, LUMIX cameras are currently some of the lowest priced mirrorless cameras on the market right now. I do think there's a strong argument now for jumping over to LUMIX. If you want to go Canon, if you want to go Sony, you're paying a massive premium now for those cameras, for that brand name, but you're not necessarily getting those sort of additional features. Obviously, the Nikon Z6 Mark III shares the same sensor as this camera, but from everything I've seen, I think the LUMIX is a better deal with its superior IBIS system, its better color science. This is such a full fat camera and it's very aggressively priced, and it just ticks so many boxes and it can cover so many bases. I just don't think there's much out there at the moment that can do this much in this form factor at this price. So I guess it really is this year's best hybrid mirrorless camera. Anyway, thanks for watching, and until next time, see you later.